The emergency beacon cut through the static like a knife through silence. Captain Sarah Chun leaned forward in her command chair aboard the UES Meridian, her dark eyes scanning the holographic display that materialized before her. The ship's AI, Marcus, processed the incoming transmission with clinical efficiency. Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from the Kepler 442 system, Marcus announced in his calm, synthesized voice. The signal appears to be from an unknown species. Translation protocols are struggling with the linguistic structure. Sarah's second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander James Park, moved to stand beside her chair. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from years of deep space exploration, each wrinkle a story of humanity's endless push into the unknown. "How far off course would this take us?" Sarah asked, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her captain's chair. "Approximately 14 hours at current velocity," Marcus replied. "However, I should note that the distress signal contains what appears to be emotional content of significant intensity." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's engines. Sarah had been commanding deep space vessels for 12 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. Something about this situation felt different. The standard protocol was clear. All human vessels were required to respond to legitimate distress calls, regardless of species origin. But there was something in Marcus's tone, something in the way the AI had hesitated, that made her pause. "Play the transmission," she ordered. The speakers crackled to life, and what emerged was unlike anything the crew had heard before. It wasn't just sound, it was raw emotion given voice. A series of clicks, whistles, and what could only be described as keening cries filled the bridge. But beneath the alien nature of the sounds, every human present could hear something unmistakable: desperation. "My cubs," the translation system finally managed, the words appearing as text on their screens while the alien voice continued its urgent plea. "My cubs are starving. Please, anyone who can hear this, just give them milk, and I'll be yours forever." The bridge remained silent for a long moment. Sarah felt something clench in her chest, a feeling that every parent and every human with even a shred of empathy would recognize. She thought of her own daughter, safe on Earth, and tried to imagine the desperation that would drive a being to broadcast such a message into the void. "Marcus, scan for any ships in the area. Are we the only ones who receive this?" "Scanning. Captain, there are several vessels within range of the transmission. I'm detecting 2 Zilani trading ships, 1 Vorthack military escort, and what appears to be a hegemony exploration vessel." Sarah knew those species well. The Zilani were traders, but they were notorious for their strict cost-benefit analyses. They wouldn't lift a finger unless there was profit involved. The Vorthack were warriors, honorable in their own way, but they had little patience for what they considered weakness. And the hegemony, the less said about their attitudes toward lesser species, the better. "Are any of them altering course toward the signal?" "Negative, Captain. All vessels are maintaining their original trajectories." James shook his head in disgust. "Figures. The galaxy's full of sentience, but most of them wouldn't cross the street to help their own mothers if there wasn't something in it for them." Sarah stood, her decision crystallizing. "Marcus, plot a course for the origin point of that transmission. All hands, prepare for emergency warp." "Captain," her chief science officer, Dr. Elena Vasquez, spoke up from her station, "we don't know anything about this species. They could be hostile. This could be a trap." Sarah nodded. "Could be. But that voice." She gestured toward the speakers, where the alien transmission continued to repeat its desperate plea. "That's not the sound of deception, Elena. That's the sound of a mother watching her children die." The ship's engines hummed with increasing intensity as they prepared for emergency warp. Sarah had served on enough first contact missions to know the protocols, the careful diplomatic dances that were usually required when meeting a new species. But sometimes, she thought, sometimes humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its careful planning or superior technology. Sometimes it was simply in the fact that humans, when faced with suffering, couldn't help but Act. Marcus, prepare a general broadcast on all frequencies. Let anyone listening know that the U.S. Meridian is responding to the distress call. As the ship jumped to warp, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be unlike any other she'd commanded. There was something in that alien voice, something that spoke to the deepest parts of human nature. She'd seen her species at their worst. The corporate wars, the resource conflicts, the political maneuvering that sometimes made her ashamed to be human. But she'd also seen them at their best, rushing into danger to help complete strangers, sacrificing everything for people they'd never met. Today, she hoped, would be one of those better days. The journey to the Kepler 442 system passed quickly, the crew using the time to prepare for whatever they might find. Dr. Vasquez worked with the xenobiology team to analyze the limited data they had about the distress call, while Chief Engineer Murphy ran diagnostics on all systems. Lieutenant Commander Park coordinated with the security teams, preparing for any scenario from peaceful contact to hostile encounter. When they finally dropped out of warp at the edge of the system, what they found defied their expectations entirely. The distress signal was coming from a small, battered vessel drifting near the system's asteroid belt. The ship, if it could even be called that, looked like it had been cobbled together from salvaged parts. Mismatched hull plating, improvised engine assemblies, and what appeared to be makeshift life support systems gave it the appearance of something held together by sheer determination and prayer. Scanning the vessel now, Captain, Dr. Vasquez reported, "I'm reading multiple life signs aboard, but the readings are concerning. Several appear to be in severe distress." "Captain," Marcus interrupted, "I'm receiving a direct communication from the vessel. Text only. Their communications array appears to be severely damaged." The message appeared on the main screen. "Please, you came. I saw your ship. My name is Kira. My cubs are dying. Do you have milk? Any kind of nutrition for young ones? I can work. I can serve. Just please help them." Sarah felt her heart clench again. Without hesitation, she turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Ship Meridian. Kira, we're here to help. We're going to bring you aboard our ship so our medical team can assess your cub's condition. Can you understand me?" The response came quickly. "Yes. Yes, I understand. Your translation is good. But I must warn you, my species, we're not like others you may have met. Some find us frightening." "Kira," Sarah replied firmly, "we're humans. We found that most species who warn us about being frightening usually aren't the ones we need to worry about. Prepare for transport." As the away team prepared to beam over to the alien vessel, Sarah couldn't help but think about humanity's place in the galactic community. They were relatively new to interstellar politics, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 years ago. In cosmic terms, they were infants among ancient civilizations. But in that short time, humanity had already earned a reputation that was both feared and respected. Other species often whispered about human recklessness, their tendency to rush into danger without proper consideration. The Vorthack called them the mad warriors who fight for strangers. The Zilani referred to them as the species that measures profit in tiers prevented rather than credits earned. The hegemony considered them dangerous idealists who refused to accept the natural order of strong, dominating weak. Sarah had always found these descriptions amusing because they missed the point entirely. Humans didn't rush into danger out of recklessness or some misguided sense of superiority. They did it because when faced with suffering, they found it genuinely difficult to do nothing. It wasn't strategy or politics or even morality in the abstract sense. It was simply who they were. "Transport successful, Captain," reported Chief O'Brien from the transporter room. "The away team has made contact." A few moments later, Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled over the comm system. "Captain, you need to see this. I'm transmitting visual data now." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the alien vessel. Sarah immediately understood why Kira had warned them about her species' appearance. The being standing before the camera was clearly intelligent, clearly sentient, but her physical form was unlike anything in the Federation's databases. Kira stood nearly 3 meters tall, with a powerful, muscular frame covered in what appeared to be a combination of fur and scale plating. Her head was elongated, almost reptilian, but her eyes were unmistakably those of a mother in distress. Large, expressive, and filled with a desperate hope that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. But it was what surrounded Kira that truly broke Sarah's heart. Scattered around the cramped interior of the vessel were 6 small forms, clearly Kira's offspring. The cubs were tiny, barely the size of human infants, but their physical state was alarming. They were severely malnourished, their small bodies trembling with weakness. Several appeared unconscious, while others made small, pitiful mewing sounds that needed no translation. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez's voice continued over the comm. "I need to get them to sick bay immediately. These cubs are in critical condition. They appear to be suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration." Without immediate intervention, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah could see it in the cubs' condition, could hear it in their weak cries. These children were dying. "Transport them directly to sick bay," Sarah ordered. "All of them, including Kira. Dr. Vasquez, I want every member of your medical team working on this. Whatever they need, whatever resources are required. Make it happen." As the transporter beam engaged and the alien family materialized in the Meridian's medical bay, Sarah found herself thinking about the other ships in the area. Ships that had received the same distress call, heard the same desperate plea, and had simply continued on their way. She wondered what those crews would think if they could see what she was seeing now. A mother who had exhausted every option, who had nothing left to offer except herself in exchange for her children's lives. But that was the difference between humanity and much of the galactic community, Sarah reflected. Other species often saw such desperation as weakness, as evidence of poor planning or inferior evolutionary development. Humans saw it as something else entirely, a call to action that transcended all other considerations. "Captain," Marcus's voice drew her from her thoughts. "I'm monitoring communications from the other vessels in the area. The hegemony ship is requesting details about our humanitarian mission." Their tone suggests curiosity rather than approval. Sarah smiled grimly. Let them be curious. In a few hours, when Kira's cubs were healthy and fed, when a family had been saved from destruction, the hegemony could file all the reports they wanted. Sarah would be proud to explain to any authority exactly why the Meridian had diverted course to help complete strangers. Because that's what humans did. When they heard a mother's desperate cry across the void of space, when they saw children suffering through no fault of their own, they acted. Not because it was profitable or strategically advantageous or even safe. They acted because the alternative, sailing past suffering when they had the power to stop it, was simply unthinkable. As Sarah made her way to sickbay to check on their new patients, she reflected on the message that would soon be transmitted throughout the galaxy. News traveled fast in interstellar society, and this story would spread quickly. The human ship that dropped everything to save a family of unknowns, asking nothing in return. Some species would mock it as foolish sentimentality. Others would see it as dangerous precedent. But a few, the ones who still remembered what it meant to value life over profit, compassion over convenience, would nod in understanding and perhaps remember why they had once believed in the possibility of a better galaxy. The automatic doors to sickbay hissed open, and Sarah stepped inside to find a scene of controlled chaos. Dr. Vasquez and her team worked with practiced efficiency, administering fluids and nutrients to the weakened cubs while monitoring their vital signs. Kira stood to one side, her large frame trembling with exhaustion and hope as she watched the humans work to save her children. When their eyes met, Kira spoke in her translated voice. "Thank you. I had given up hope. The others, they all passed by. But you came." Sarah approached slowly, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. "We couldn't do anything else, Kira. No one should have to choose between their life and their children's." "I do not understand," Kira said, her head tilting in confusion. "Why risk your mission your safety, your resources for strangers. What do you gain from this? It was a question Sarah had been asked before, in various forms, by dozens of alien species. She'd given the official diplomatic answers, talked about human values and cultural imperatives. But here, standing beside a desperate mother watching her children fight for life, the real answer seemed much simpler. We gained the knowledge that we helped, Sarah said quietly. We gained the satisfaction of knowing that tonight, 6 cubs will go to sleep with full bellies instead of dying alone in the dark. We gain the understanding that in a galaxy that often seems cruel and indifferent, we manage to be something else. Kira stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the alien struggling to process this concept. Finally, Kira spoke again. Your species, you are very strange. Sarah chuckled softly. So we've been told. But, Kira, there's something you need to understand. You said you'd be ours forever if we helped your cubs. That's not necessary. Help isn't something humans sell. It's something we give. When your cubs are healthy, when your ship is repaired, you'll be free to go wherever you choose. The expression that crossed Kira's alien features was indescribable, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and something that might have been wonder. She looked around at the medical team working tirelessly on her children, then back at Sarah. I think, Kira said slowly, I'm beginning to understand why the galaxy fears your kind. Not because you are violent or cruel, but because you're something else entirely. Something that threatens everything they thought they knew about how the universe works. As if to punctuate her words, one of the cubs let out a stronger cry. Not the weak mewing of near death, but the robust complaint of a hungry child demanding food. Dr. Vasquez looked up with a smile on her face. Captain, I think we're going to be just fine. All 6 cubs are responding well to treatment. Give us another few hours, and they'll be bouncing off the walls. Sarah nodded, feeling a familiar warmth spread through her chest. This was why she'd joined Starfleet, why she'd spent her life among the stars. Not for the glory or the discovery, but for moments like this, when a vast, cold universe suddenly felt a little warmer, a little more hopeful. Outside the medical bay, she knew the galaxy continued its ancient dance of politics and power, profit, and prestige. Ships passed by distress calls because their schedules were too important to interrupt. Species calculated the cost of compassion and found it wanting. The strong continued to dominate the weak because that's how things had always been. But today, in this small corner of space, things were different. Today, a family lived because someone had heard their cry and decided that schedules and protocols and diplomatic concerns were less important than the simple act of helping. And that, Sarah thought, was the most human thing of all. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the Meridian's sick bay had been transformed into something resembling a nursery. The 6 cubs, now healthy and energetic, had proven to be remarkably resilient once proper nutrition was restored. Dr. Vasquez had worked tirelessly to develop a milk substitute that met their specific physiological needs, and the results were nothing short of miraculous. Captain Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of sick bay, watching through the transparent aluminum barrier as the cubs played under their mother's watchful eye. Kira had barely left their side since the rescue, alternating between fierce protectiveness and overwhelming gratitude. Her species, the crew had learned, were called to the carry, and they were among the galaxy's newest spacefaring civilizations. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Park approached, carrying a data pad with the latest intelligence reports. We've received some interesting communications from Starfleet Command, and some not-so-interesting ones from the Hegemony Council. Sarah accepted the pad, scrolling through the official messages. Starfleet's response was predictably supportive. Admiral Hassan had sent personal commendations for the crew's actions and authorization for any resources needed to complete the humanitarian mission. The Hegemony's response was equally predictable in its disapproval. Dangerous precedent, Sarah read aloud from the Hegemony's formal complaint. Encouraging lesser species to become dependent on charity rather than developing proper survival strategies. Charming as always. There's more, Park said, his expression grim. Intelligence suggests that Kira and her cubs weren't just randomly lost in space. They were exiled from their homeworld. Sarah looked up sharply. Exiled? For what? That's where it gets complicated, Captain. According to our xenosociology team's analysis of Kira's statements, the Carey Society operates on a strict hierarchical system based on physical strength and resource control. Kira was apparently part of a lower caste, essentially workers and craftsmen. When food shortages hit their homeworld, the ruling caste decided that supporting the non-essential population was wasteful. Sarah felt her jaw clench. She'd heard similar stories from other species, but it never got easier to hear about societies that discarded their most vulnerable members during times of crisis. So they were simply cast out to die. Worse than that, according to the reports, Kira's cubs were fathered by a male from a higher caste. Inter-caste breeding is apparently forbidden, and the cubs were seen as genetic contamination. The exile was meant to be both punishment and prevention, ensuring that the bloodline couldn't pollute the Carey Society. The data pad made a small cracking sound in Sarah's grip. She forced herself to relax, handing it back to Park. Has Kira told us any of this directly? She's been reluctant to discuss her past. Dr. Vasquez thinks it's shame. She believes she's somehow failed her cubs by not being able to provide for them properly. Sarah shook her head in disgust. Throughout her career, she'd encountered dozens of alien societies with customs that seemed brutal or senseless by human standards. Usually, she managed to maintain diplomatic objectivity, understanding that different species evolved different social structures for different reasons. But this touched something deeper than professional consideration. Captain, Marcus's voice interrupted her thoughts through the comm system. We're receiving a priority communication from the Carey homeworld. Should I put it through to the bridge? Sarah exchanged a look with Park. Patch it through to my ready room. James, you're with me. Minutes later, they sat across from a holographic display showing 3 imposing the Carey figures. Unlike Kira, who bore the lean frame and gentler features of her worker caste, these beings were massive, easily 4 meters tall, with armored hide and scarred features that spoke of lives built around dominance and violence. The central figure, who wore elaborate metallic ornaments that probably indicated rank, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. I am War Master Grok of the Carey High Council. You harbor a criminal exile and her contaminated offspring. Return them immediately for proper disposal. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though every instinct screamed at her to tell this oversized bully exactly what she thought of him. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earthship Meridian. The individuals you refer to are under our protection as refugees fleeing persecution. They will not be returned. Grok's eyes narrowed, and the 2 figures flanking him shifted in what was clearly aggressive posturing. You do not understand, human. These creatures are genetically inferior, bred outside acceptable parameters. They carry disease, cultural, and biological contamination that threatens our species' purity. They must be eliminated. Understand perfectly, Sarah replied, her voice growing colder. You've decided that children should die because you disapprove of their parents' relationship. I've encountered this kind of thinking before, War Master Grok, and I find it just as repugnant now as I did then. The War Master's expression shifted to one of dangerous fury. You dare judge the Carey law? Our society has maintained order for 10,000 years through proper hierarchical structure. Your soft human sentimentality is a weakness that will destroy you. Perhaps, Sarah acknowledged, but I'd rather be destroyed by compassion than survive by abandoning it. The Carey refugees will remain under our protection. If you have an issue with that, you're welcome to file a complaint with the Federation Council. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Sarah and Park alone in the ready room. Park was the first to break the silence. That's going to complicate things, Captain. The Carey might not be a major power, but they have allies in the hegemony. This could turn into a diplomatic incident. Sarah nodded, already considering the implications. The Federation's first contact protocols were clear about respecting alien cultures, even when their practices conflicted with human values. but they were equally clear about protecting refugees and preventing genocide. The situation with Kira and her cubs fell squarely into a gray area that would require careful navigation. "Marcus," she called out to the ship's AI, "what's our current status on communications monitoring?" "Several ships have altered course toward our position, Captain. I'm detecting 2 hegemony cruisers and what appears to be a Vakari military vessel. Estimated arrival time is 18 hours. Sarah felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders, the weight of command when facing impossible choices. She could surrender Kira and the cubs to avoid an interstellar incident, potentially saving her ship and crew, but condemning innocent children to death. Or she could stand her ground and risk everything on the principle that some things were worth fighting for. "James, call a senior staff meeting. I want department heads in the conference room in 20 minutes. As Park left to gather the senior staff, Sarah remained in her ready room, staring out at the stars. She thought about Earth, about the long history of humans making similar choices between safety and principle. She thought about her own daughter, safely tucked away in a comfortable life that was only possible because previous generations had been willing to fight for ideals that seemed impractical at the time. 20 minutes later, the senior staff assembled around the conference table. Dr. Vasquez looked exhausted. She'd been working around the clock to ensure the Cubs' continued health. Chief Engineer Murphy appeared concerned but determined, while Security Chief Torres wore the expression of someone already calculating tactical options. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, "we have a situation. The Vakari government wants their exiles returned, and they're bringing friends to make sure it happens. I need options." "Captain," Dr. Vasquez spoke first. "From a medical standpoint, returning those cubs to their home world would be a death sentence. They've shown me scars, evidence of systematic abuse before the exile, and the War Master's reference to proper disposal suggests their intentions are genocidal." Security Chief Torres leaned forward. "Tactically, we're outmatched if this turns into a shooting war. One Federation starship against multiple hegemony cruisers isn't favorable odds. But we do have options for evasion, possibly reaching Federation space before they can intercept us. Running away sends a message," Park observed. "It tells the galaxy that humans will abandon their principles when threatened. That could have serious implications for future humanitarian missions." Chief Murphy, normally focused purely on technical matters, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Captain, I've been down to sickbay. I've seen those cubs. My own daughter is about their age, and the thought of sending them back to that." He shook his head. "Some things are worth fighting for." Sarah looked around the table, seeing her own convictions reflected in the faces of her crew. These were people who had signed up for exploration and discovery, not war. But when faced with the choice between safety and saving innocent lives, their answer was unanimous. "Marcus, what's the status of our guests?" "Kira has been monitoring our communications, Captain. She's aware of the situation and has requested to speak with you privately." Sarah found Kira in the ship's arboretum, standing among the earth plants and breathing deeply of the artificial atmosphere. The alien mother had been fascinated by the concept of growing plants purely for beauty and air purification. Such luxury was unknown in the Carey society. "Captain Chun," Kira said without turning around, "I heard the transmission from my homeworld. I know what this means for your ship. Kira, you and your cubs are under our protection. That's not negotiable." Kira turned, her large eyes filled with an emotion that transcended species barriers. "Why? You have already saved us. You could return us now and claim you were simply following proper diplomatic protocol. Your superiors would understand. The galaxy would understand." Sarah moved to stand beside her, looking out at the small garden that represented humanity's determination to bring life and beauty even to the depths of space. "Do you know why we grow these plants, Kira?" "For oxygen production, I assume. We could get oxygen more efficiently from machines. We grow them because humans need to be surrounded by life, by growing things that serve no practical purpose except to remind us that there's beauty worth preserving in the universe. Sarah turned to face the alien mother. Your cubs are the same principle. They don't need to serve a purpose or fit into someone else's idea of genetic purity. They deserve to live because life itself has value. Kira was quiet for a long moment. Your species truly is strange. On my world, everything must have utility, must contribute to the hierarchy's strength. The concept of value existing for its own sake is alien to us. Maybe that's why you were exiled, Sarah suggested gently. Maybe you understood something your society had forgotten. Perhaps. But, Captain, I cannot allow you to sacrifice your ship for us. If your enemies come, I will surrender myself and my cubs rather than see your people harmed. Sarah shook her head firmly. That's not going to happen, Kira. But I need you to understand something. We're not doing this just for you. We're doing it because the alternative is unacceptable. If we allow bullies to dictate who deserves protection and who doesn't, then we become complicit in their crimes. Before Kira could respond, Marcus's voice filled the arboretum. Captain, priority message from Starfleet Command. Sarah made her way back to the bridge, where Admiral Hassan's face appeared on the main screen. The Admiral was a woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of war and politics to harbor many illusions about the galaxy's nature. Captain Chun, I've been monitoring the situation. The Federation Council is meeting in emergency session to address the diplomatic implications, but that could take days. In the meantime, I'm authorizing you to take whatever action you deem necessary to protect the refugees under your care. Sarah felt a surge of relief. Understood, Admiral. What about the hegemony response? Let me worry about the politics, Sarah. You focus on doing what's right. And Captain, Hassan's expression softened slightly. Make sure those cubs know they're safe. Children shouldn't have to fear that adults will abandon them to monsters. As the transmission ended, Sarah looked around her bridge at the crew preparing for what could be their most dangerous mission yet. These people had families, dreams, futures that could be cut short by the decision to protect a refugee family from another species. But none of them suggested retreat. None of them recommended the pragmatic solution of surrendering Kira and her cubs to avoid conflict. Marcus, open a ship-wide channel. Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Shin speaking to all hands. By now, you're all aware of our situation. In approximately 16 hours, we'll likely face superior enemy forces demanding we surrender to the Carey refugees we rescued. I want every member of this crew to understand that we're not required to take this stand. Starfleet regulations would support a decision to transfer the refugees to appropriate authorities and withdraw from the situation. She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. But sometimes regulations aren't enough. Sometimes we have to decide what kind of people we want to be, what kind of species we want humanity to become known as throughout the galaxy. Do we want to be remembered as the ones who calculated odds and made safe choices? Or do we want to be remembered as the ones who stood between helpless children and those who would murder them? The ship's intercom carried the sounds of her crew. Engineers working to boost shield capacity, security teams checking weapons systems, medical staff preparing emergency protocols. But underneath the professional efficiency, Sarah could hear something else: determination. Not the reckless bravado of warriors seeking glory, but the quiet resolution of ordinary people who had decided that some things were worth risking everything to protect. All hands, prepare for combat. And remember, we're not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. We're fighting for the right of cubs to grow up safe from those who would kill them for the circumstances of their birth. If that's not worth fighting for, then nothing is. As the Meridian continued its course toward the Federation border, Sarah reflected on the message this battle would send regardless of its outcome. If they won, it would demonstrate humanity's willingness to sacrifice for their principles. If they lost, it would show that humans preferred death to dishonor, preferred destruction to participation in genocide. Either way, The galaxy would learn something important about the newest members of the interstellar community. They would learn that humanity measured success not in territory conquered or wealth accumulated, but in children saved and families protected. They would learn that humans could be dangerous, not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they were willing to risk everything for ideals that most species had long since abandoned. In her ready room, Sarah composed what might be her final log entry as captain of the Meridian. Tomorrow would bring battle, and there was no guarantee that her ship or crew would survive the encounter. But tonight, 6 small cubs were sleeping peacefully in sickbay, their bellies full and their fears forgotten, protected by humans who had never met them before but considered their lives worth dying for. And that, Sarah thought as she finished her log, was the most human legacy they could hope to leave among the stars. The enemy ships appeared on the Meridian's sensors exactly 18 hours after the confrontation with War Master Grok. 3 vessels emerged from warp space in perfect formation, 2 massive hegemony cruisers flanking a smaller, but heavily armed the Carey battleship. Each ship alone outgunned the Meridian. Together, they represented overwhelming force designed to crush any resistance. Captain Sarah Chun stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display as her opponents maneuvered into attack positions. The hegemony cruisers moved with mechanical precision, their crews undoubtedly calculating firing solutions and shield harmonics with cold efficiency. The Carey ship, by contrast, seemed almost eager in its approach, like a predator that had finally cornered wounded prey. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Park reported from his position at Tactical. The lead hegemony vessel is hailing us. On screen, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the hegemony cruiser. The alien in command was a Vorthack, a species known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess and rigid adherence to hierarchy. General Keth's scaled features bore the scars of countless battles, and his 4 eyes regarded Sarah with what might have been professional respect tinged with disappointment. Captain Chun of the human vessel Meridian. I am General Keth of the Hegemony 4th Fleet. You harbor criminals wanted by a legitimate government. Surrender them immediately, and your ship will be permitted to depart with no further action. Sarah straightened in her command chair. General Keth, the individuals aboard my ship are refugees fleeing persecution. They are under Federation protection and will not be surrendered. Keth's mandibles clicked in what Sarah recognized as the Vorthack equivalent of sigh. Captain, I have studied your species extensively since your arrival in galactic politics. Humans possess admirable courage, but you consistently fail to understand the larger implications of your actions. This matter extends far beyond a single family. Enlighten me, General. The hegemony maintains order among dozens of species through adherence to established law and custom. If we permit one species to interfere in another's internal affairs based on emotional considerations, the entire structure of galactic civilization will collapse into chaos. Keth leaned forward in his command chair. These refugees represent a dangerous precedent. Today you save the Carey exiles. Tomorrow another species demands similar intervention in their affairs. Where does it end? Sarah had heard similar arguments before. The logic of empire, the necessity of maintaining order, even at the cost of justice. It was the same reasoning that had justified countless atrocities throughout Earth's history. The comfortable lie that allowed good people to participate in evil systems. It ends, Sarah replied firmly, with the understanding that some laws are wrong and that civilizations worth preserving don't sacrifice children to maintain political convenience. Captain, Ket's voice carried a note of genuine regret. Your species' compassion is both your greatest strength and your fatal weakness. You cannot save everyone. You cannot correct every injustice. At some point, pragmatic considerations must override emotional responses. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through the communication. War Master Grok's image appeared in a split screen beside General Keth, The carry leader's features twisted with barely contained rage. Enough diplomatic pleasantries. Grok snarled. Human, you hold contaminated genetic material that threatens the purity of our species. Return the abominations immediately, or we will take them by force and eliminate your vessel as well. Sarah looked between the two alien commanders, one representing cold, calculating order, the other embodying savage, xenophobic hatred. Both wanted the same outcome, the death of innocent children. The only difference was their reasoning. General Keth, Sarah addressed the Vorthack commander, you speak of order and law, but what law demands the murder of children? What order is worth preserving if it requires genocide to maintain it? Keth was silent for a moment, his four eyes studying Sarah's face. Captain, the Vakari are a sovereign species. Their internal laws, however distasteful we may find them personally, are not subject to outside interference. And if those laws demanded the execution of all the carry with blue eyes, or left-handedness, or any other arbitrary characteristic, Sarah's voice grew heated. At what point does sovereignty become an excuse for atrocity? Captain Chun, Keth said slowly, you are forcing me to make a choice I do not wish to make. Stand down. Transfer the refugees to the carry custody. This is your final warning. The transmission ended, leaving the Meridian's bridge in tense silence. Sarah looked around at her crew, men and women who had volunteered for deep space exploration, not warfare. They were scientists and engineers, diplomats and medics, people who had joined Starfleet to push the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. But when faced with the choice between their own safety and the lives of innocent children, their decision was unanimous. Captain, Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the comm system. Kira is requesting permission to come to the bridge. Sarah nodded to the communications officer. Granted. Minutes later, Kira entered the bridge carrying one of her cubs, the smallest one, who had been weakest during the rescue. The little being was now healthy and alert, its large eyes taking in the strange surroundings with obvious curiosity. The sight of mother and child created a stark contrast to the cold tactical displays showing enemy ships preparing for attack. Captain, Kira said, her translated voice heavy with emotion, I have heard your conversations with the enemy commanders. Please, do not sacrifice your people for us. We have lived our lives. These cubs have barely begun theirs, but if they must die so that others may live. Stop. Sarah's voice cut through the alien mother's words like a blade. Kira, I need you to understand something about humans. We don't make calculations about whose life is worth more. We don't weigh the value of cubs against the safety of starship crews. When we see innocence threatened, we act. Period. She turned to address her bridge crew, speaking loudly enough for Kira to hear every word. My daughter is safe on Earth, growing up in a world where children don't have to fear being murdered for their parents' choices. That safety exists because previous generations of humans were willing to fight and die rather than let bullies determine who deserve protection. The tactical display showed the enemy ships moving into final attack positions. Weapons were powering up, shields activating, targeting systems locking onto the Meridian's hull. In minutes, the battle would begin. Kira, Sarah continued, you offer to be ours forever in exchange for helping your cubs. But you misunderstood the transaction. We're not helping you because of what you can offer us. We're helping you because helping is what we do. It's who we are. The first shot came from the carry battleship, a blazing energy beam that struck the Meridian's forward shields with tremendous force. The ship shook under the impact, but the shields held. On the tactical display, Sarah could see the hegemony cruisers moving to flanking positions, preparing to bracket her ship in a crossfire that would overwhelm their defenses within minutes. Return fire, Sarah ordered. Target their weapons systems. Let's see if we can convince them we're serious. The Meridian's phaser arrays lanced out, striking to the carry ship's forward batteries with surgical precision. Explosions bloomed across the enemy vessel's hull as weapon systems overloaded and vented plasma into space. But even as her crew scored hits on their opponents, Sarah knew they were fighting a losing battle. 3 ships against 1. Superior firepower, overwhelming numbers. The mathematics of warfare were brutally clear. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called from the science station. "I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching from our starboard side. Multiple vessels dropping out of warp." Sarah's heart sank. Reinforcements for the enemy would end any hope of escape or victory. But as the new contacts resolved on the main view screen, she realized her assumptions had been wrong. 5 ships materialized out of warp space, and none of them matched hegemony or the carry configurations. Sarah recognized the sleek lines of a Federation cruiser, the distinctive silhouette of a Vulcan science vessel, and, to her amazement, what appeared to be an independent freighter of unknown configuration. "This is Admiral Hassan aboard the Federation cruiser Endeavour." A familiar voice crackled over the communication system. "All hostile vessels, cease fire immediately and withdraw from this system." General Keth's image reappeared on the view screen, his 4 eyes wide with surprise. "Admiral Hassan, this is a hegemony enforcement action against criminal elements. Federation interference is a violation of established treaties." General Hassan's voice carried the authority of decades in command. "Those criminal elements are refugees under Federation protection. Your presence here constitutes an act of aggression against a Federation vessel in neutral space." But it was the next voice that truly shocked everyone present. Captain Tipal of the Vulcan science vessel spoke with characteristic precision. "General Keth, the Vulcan Science Academy has reviewed the situation regarding the Vakari refugees. Logic dictates that any society which condemns children to death for circumstances beyond their control has forfeited its moral authority to demand their return." Even more surprising was the third voice, gruff, clearly non-human, but speaking accented standard. "This is Captain Zara of the independent vessel Wanderer's Hope. We heard about the human ship protecting cubs from bullies. My crew unanimously voted to assist." Sarah stared at the tactical display, watching as more ships continued to arrive. A Tellarite cargo hauler, an Andorian escort, even what appeared to be a converted Ferengi merchant vessel. Ships from across the galaxy, representing dozens of species, all converging on this remote system to support the Meridian stand. "How?" Sarah whispered. Marcus provided the answer. "Captain, it appears that news of our situation was transmitted throughout local subspace networks. The response has been significant." General Keth's expression had shifted from confident authority to obvious concern. His tactical advantage had evaporated in minutes, replaced by a growing fleet of vessels that clearly supported the human position. "Admiral Hassan," Keth said slowly, "the hegemony cannot ignore this flagrant interference in sovereign affairs. There will be consequences." "There already are consequences, General," Hassan replied. "The consequence is that the galaxy has seen what happens when humans are forced to choose between safety and principle. They've seen us willing to stand alone against superior force, rather than abandon innocence to their fate. And, apparently, that example has inspired others." War Master Grok's voice cut through the diplomatic exchange like a blade. "This changes nothing. Those genetic abominations must be destroyed to preserve the carry purity." But now a new voice joined the conversation. Captain Zara of the Wanderer's Hope. Her words carried the weight of personal experience. "War Master, my own species was nearly destroyed by purity advocates who decided that certain bloodlines were contaminated. The humans call such thinking genocide. We call it evil." More voices joined in, ship captains representing dozens of species, each with their own reasons for supporting the refugees. Some had fled persecution themselves. Others had lost family members to xenophobic violence. Still others simply recognized that the principle at stake transcended species boundaries. Sarah looked at Kira, who was clutching her cub close while staring at the view screen in amazement. The alien mother's eyes were wide with disbelief as she listened to representatives from across the galaxy, speaking in defense of her family's right to exist. "I do not understand," Kira whispered. "Why would so many strangers risk themselves for us?" Sarah smiled. feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the bridge's environmental systems. Because, Kira, it turns out that compassion isn't a uniquely human trait. It's something that connects thinking beings across the galaxy, regardless of species or culture. We just reminded them that it exists. General Keth's image flickered on the main screen one final time. The Vorthack commander's expression was unreadable as he surveyed the growing fleet arrayed against his forces. "Captain Shun," he said finally, "you have created a situation that will require extensive diplomatic consideration. The hegemony withdraws from this engagement pending review by higher authorities." The hegemony cruisers began moving away from the confrontation zone, their massive forms disappearing into warp space with the dignity of a controlled retreat rather than a rout. Only War Master Grok's vessel remained, the Vakari ship holding position defiantly despite being vastly outnumbered. "Grok," Admiral Hassan's voice carried the finality of absolute authority. "You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal procedures before we consider your presence an act of piracy." The Vakari ship held position for exactly 29 seconds before jumping to warp, Grok's final transmission consisting of threats and curses that needed no translation. As the last enemy vessel disappeared from sensors, Sarah felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Around her, the bridge crew began to relax for the first time in hours, but their celebration was muted by the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Captain," Admiral Hassan's image appeared on the main screen. "The Federation Council has voted to grant formal asylum status to the Vakari refugees. They'll be settled on New Geneva, where several other refugee communities have been established." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on Kira and her cubs. The alien family would be safe now, protected by Federation law, and the combined strength of dozens of species who had decided that some principles were worth defending. But more than that, they had become symbols of something larger, proof that the galaxy's future didn't have to be determined by the strong preying on the weak, that compassion and justice weren't naive ideals, but practical necessities for any civilization worth preserving. As the mixed fleet began to disperse, each ship returning to its original mission, Sarah reflected on the message that would spread throughout the galaxy. Today, beings from dozens of worlds had stood together against tyranny, not because it was profitable or strategically advantageous, but because it was right, and at the center of it all had been a simple human truth, that when children cry out for help, decent people answer that call, regardless of the cost to themselves. 2 months had passed since the confrontation in the Kepler 442 system, and the galaxy had not remained quiet. The Meridian Incident, as the media had dubbed it, had sent shockwaves through interstellar politics that continued to reverberate across dozens of worlds. Captain Sarah Chun stood in her quarters aboard the newly refitted starship, reading the latest intelligence reports that painted a picture of a galaxy in transition. The immediate aftermath had been predictable enough. The Hegemony Council had filed formal protests with every major power, claiming that human interference in sovereign affairs represented a dangerous precedent that threatened galactic stability. The Vakari government had withdrawn from several trade agreements in retaliation, though this had hurt them more than their intended targets. But the unexpected consequences had proved far more significant. "Captain," Marcus's voice interrupted her reading. "You have a priority transmission from Admiral Hassan. She's requesting a secure channel." "Put her through, Marcus." Admiral Hassan's weathered face appeared on Sarah's personal view screen, but instead of her usual composed expression, she wore a look of barely controlled amazement. "Sarah, I need to brief you on some developments that aren't in the official reports yet. The Meridian Incident has had consequences we never anticipated." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Good consequences or bad consequences, Admiral? That depends on your perspective. From the hegemony's point of view, probably catastrophic. From the standpoint of galactic civilization, potentially revolutionary." Hassan paused, organizing her thoughts. "Sarah, we're receiving asylum requests from 17 different species. Entire populations are fleeing oppressive governments and requesting Federation protection." The magnitude of Hassan's statement took a moment to register. Sarah had expected some political fallout from their rescue of Kira's family, but this suggested something far more significant. 17 species, Admiral, all as a direct result of the galaxy seeing what happened when beings stood up to bullies and won. The story of the Meridian has spread through subspace networks faster than any news in recorded history. Every species that has ever suffered under authoritarian rule now knows that resistance is possible, and that others will stand with them when they resist. Hassan's expression grew more serious. But, Sarah, it's not just refugees we're dealing with. We're seeing active rebellions on 8 different worlds. The ruling castes that have maintained order through oppression for centuries are suddenly finding that their subjects won't tolerate abuse anymore. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had hoped to save one family. Instead, it seemed she had accidentally ignited a galactic revolution. Admiral, what's the Federation's position on this? Officially, we're providing humanitarian aid to refugees and maintaining strict neutrality regarding internal affairs of member and non-member species. Hassan smiled grimly. Unofficially, the Council is scared out of their minds and thrilled beyond words at the same time. We're watching the birth of something entirely new in galactic politics. Before Sarah could respond, her door chime sounded. Come in. Lieutenant Commander Park entered, carrying a datapad and wearing an expression that suggested significant news. Captain, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received a transmission from New Geneva. It's from Kira. Sarah nodded to Hassan's image on the screen. Admiral, I should take this. Can we continue this briefing later? Of course. But, Sarah, be prepared for more unexpected consequences. The galaxy is changing, and your name is going to be remembered as one of the catalysts for that change. As Hassan's transmission ended, Park activated his datapad, and Kira's familiar voice filled the room. But instead of the desperate, broken tones they had first heard in space, this voice carried strength and determination. Captain Shun, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted you to know that my cubs are thriving on New Geneva. They have learned to read human writing and have made friends with refugee children from 6 other species. Yesterday, my youngest cub asked me to tell her the story of the brave humans who saved us from the dark between stars. Sarah smiled, imagining the scene Kira described. New Geneva had become a symbol throughout the galaxy, a world where beings from dozens of species live together in peace, their children playing together without regard for the prejudices that had divided their homeworlds. Kira's message continued. But I am not contacting you merely to report on our welfare. Captain, something is happening that you must know about. My people, not the ruling castes, but the workers and crafters and farmers who were deemed expendable, they have heard about what happened to us. They have learned that exile is not the only option when faced with oppression. Park looked up from his datapad. Captain, intelligence confirms it. There's been a general uprising on the Vakari homeworld. The worker castes have overthrown their oppressors and established a provisional government. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. An entire planet? Not just any planet, Captain. The Vakari homeworld is a major industrial center for this entire sector. Their revolution has cut off manufacturing for dozens of hegemony member species. The economic implications alone. Kira's voice drew their attention back to the message. The new Vakari government has asked me to serve as their ambassador to the Federation. They want to establish formal diplomatic relations and begin the process of applying for Federation membership. Captain Shun, my people wish to build a society based on the principles you showed us, that every life has value, that children should never suffer for their parents' circumstances, that compassion is not weakness, but the foundation of true strength. Sarah sat heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what was unfolding. A single act of mercy had somehow triggered a chain reaction that was reshaping galactic civilization. She thought about her original mission orders. Routine survey of uninhabited systems, standard exploration protocols, nothing that should have changed the course of history. There's more, Captain, Park said quietly. The Vulcan Science Academy has published a comprehensive analysis of what they're calling the compassion paradigm. They're arguing that human-style humanitarian intervention represents an evolutionary step forward in interstellar relations. And the reaction to that analysis? Mixed. The hegemony is calling it dangerous idealism that will lead to galactic chaos. The Romulans see it as evidence of Federation weakness. But the Klingon, Park paused, consulting his datapad. The Klingon are describing it as honorable warfare against dishonorable enemies. Several Klingon houses have begun providing military support to liberation movements on hegemony worlds. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of unintended consequences pressing down on her. Every action she had taken seemed logical and necessary at the time, but the cumulative effect was staggering. "Captain," Marcus's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We're receiving another priority transmission. This one is from the Hegemony Council directly." On screen, the view screen displayed the imposing council chamber of the Hegemony, with representatives from dozens of species arranged in rigid hierarchical order. At the center sat Prime Minister Vex, a being whose species Sarah didn't recognize, but whose expression of barely controlled fury was universal. "Captain Chun," Vex began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have violated every principle of civilized interstellar conduct. Your interference in sovereign affairs has destabilized an order that has maintained peace for over 1,000 years." Sarah stood, facing the screen with the same composure she had shown during the original confrontation. "Prime Minister Vex, we responded to a distress call and provided humanitarian aid to refugees fleeing persecution. These are fundamental principles of civilized behavior." "Civilized behavior?" Vex's voice rose to a roar. "Your actions have triggered 17 rebellions across hegemony space. Billions of beings are dying in conflicts that would never have occurred without your interference." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known that her actions would have consequences, but the thought that her decision to save Kira's family might have led to widespread death was almost unbearable. "Prime Minister," she said slowly, "if rebellions are occurring, it's because your member species were already suffering under oppressive conditions. We didn't create that suffering. We simply showed that resistance was possible." "Resistance?" Another voice joined the conversation. General Keth, his scarred features grim with the weight of military experience. "Captain Chun, I have studied your species extensively since our first encounter. Humans possess a fatal flaw in their thinking, which is, you believe that good intentions justify any consequences. You see suffering and respond emotionally without considering the larger implications of your actions. The order you have disrupted took millennia to establish. The chaos you have created will take centuries to resolve." Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "General Keth, what you call order was built on the systematic oppression of the weak by the strong. If that order is collapsing, perhaps it deserves to collapse." Prime Minister Vex leaned forward in his chair. "Captain, the Hegemony Council has voted unanimously. Effective immediately, all human vessels are banned from hegemony space. Any Federation ship found within our territory will be considered a hostile force and dealt with accordingly." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah's quarters in heavy silence. Park was the first to speak. "Captain, that's essentially a declaration of war. The hegemony controls nearly 30% of known space." Sarah nodded, understanding the full implications. The Federation would now be forced to choose between abandoning their humanitarian principles or facing potential military conflict with one of the galaxy's major powers. Before she could respond, her door chimed again. This time, Dr. Vasquez entered, accompanied by a being Sarah didn't immediately recognize. The alien was humanoid, but clearly not from any species in the Federation database. Tall, graceful, with silvery skin and large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez said, "I'd like you to meet Ambassador THYSS of the Ethereal Collective." Her ship arrived this morning, requesting permission to speak with you personally. Ambassador HFY stepped forward, moving with fluid grace that seemed to defy gravity. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made it seem like music. Captain Chun, my people have observed your recent actions with great interest. The Ethereal Collective represents 47 species that withdrew from galactic politics centuries ago due to what we considered the irredeemable corruption of the major powers. Sarah studied the alien ambassador, sensing that this conversation would be significant. What changed your minds? You did, Captain. The Meridian incident, as it has come to be known, demonstrated something we believed no longer existed in the galaxy. The willingness to sacrifice for principle, to risk everything for beings you had never met. HFY moved closer, her large eyes fixed on Sarah's face. We have watched civilizations rise and fall for millennia. We have seen empires built on conquest, federations founded on mutual benefit, hegemonies maintained through fear. But we have never seen anything like what you accomplished. Ambassador, I didn't set out to accomplish anything except saving a family in distress. HFY smiled, an expression that seemed to illuminate her entire being. Precisely. That is what makes it so remarkable. You acted from pure compassion, without calculation of cost or benefit, without consideration of political implications. And in doing so, you reminded the galaxy what true civilization looks like. She paused, her expression growing more serious. Captain, the Ethereal Collective is prepared to offer the Federation a formal alliance. Our combined fleets would outnumber hegemony forces 3-1. More importantly, our advanced technologies could provide significant advantages in any potential conflict. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her once again. The choice between peace and principle, between safety and justice, between the status quo and the possibility of something better. Ambassador HFY, what exactly are you proposing? We propose the establishment of a new galactic order based on the principles you demonstrated. That strength exists to protect the weak, that prosperity means nothing if it requires the suffering of innocence, that true civilization is measured not by the power of its armies, but by the compassion of its actions. Park looked up from his data pad, his expression grave. Captain, I'm receiving reports that 12 more species have requested Federation protection in the last hour. And Admiral Hassan is requesting an immediate conference with all senior staff. Sarah looked around her quarters at the assembled beings, human, alien, each representing different aspects of the choice before her. The galaxy was changing whether she wanted it to or not. The question was whether that change would be guided by the principles of compassion and justice, or whether it would descend into the chaos of uncontrolled conflict. Ambassador HFY, I appreciate your offer, but I need to understand something. If we form this alliance, if we actively oppose the hegemony's system of oppression, we'll be committing to a path that leads inevitably to war. HFY nodded solemnly. Yes, Captain, but consider the alternative. If we do nothing, if we allow the hegemony to crush these rebellions and restore their previous order, what message does that send? That compassion is weakness? That standing up for the innocent leads only to defeat? She moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. Captain Chun, your species is young, but you have already taught the galaxy something that many of us have forgotten, that there are things worth fighting for, principles worth dying for, ideals worth preserving even at great cost. Sarah joined her at the viewport, looking out at the vast expanse of space that had become the stage for an ideological war between two fundamentally different visions of civilization. Marcus, she said finally, sent a message to Admiral Hassan. Tell her that the Meridian requests permission to return to Earth for crew rotation and strategic consultation. Message sent, Captain. As Ambassador HFY departed and Park returned to his duties, Sarah remained at the viewport, contemplating the choice before humanity and the Federation. They could withdraw from galactic politics, maintain their current borders, and hope that the chaos beyond their space would eventually resolve itself. Or they could embrace their role as catalysts for change, accepting the responsibility and the danger that came with standing up for their principles on a galactic scale. She thought about Kira and her cubs, now safe on New Geneva but forever changed by their experience. She thought about the countless beings across the galaxy who were looking to the Federation as a symbol of hope, proof that resistance to oppression was possible. She thought about her own daughter, growing up in a universe where the choice between safety and principle might determine the kind of galaxy she would inherit. The answer, when it came to her, was simple. It had always been simple, really. When children cried out for help across the void of space, decent people answered that call. When the weak were threatened by the strong, those with power had a responsibility to intervene. When the choice came down to maintaining a comfortable status quo or fighting for a better future, there was really only one choice that humans could make. The galaxy was changing, and humanity would help guide that change, not because it was safe or profitable or strategically advantageous, but because it was right. Because in the end, that's what humans did. When faced with suffering, they had the power to stop. They acted. When confronted with injustice, they could correct. They fought. When given the choice between principle and pragmatism, they chose principle every time. It was, Sarah reflected as she prepared for the journey home, the most human thing of all. And perhaps in a galaxy that had forgotten what compassion looked like, that was exactly what was needed.